You see?
Black woman to work for Barclays Bank in Salisbury at that time. So I was young and pretty, and you always had to carry yourself with dignity. So just before lunch, we take lunch orders. And I remember this lady, a Mrs. Rogers, saying, "Oh, why didn't you ask the boy to get your lunch?" And this boy who got the lunch orders was a big black African man. He walked towards a desk and banged his fist on the desk and said, "I am not your boy." It was always the white women. They were absolutely clueless. I remember taking the bus from Highfields through Eastleigh, and we'd see the white people playing in their swimming pools, whilst we weren't even allowed to walk on the same streets. It used to bother me so much. And the older generation would say, "No, Kwamunorire, why are you fighting?" You see, they were content with having their little houses in the townships, but we wanted more. And this is why you would just cross to Mozambique without telling your family. You just would not come back from school and go and join the war. My cousin Dagi, he was a guerrilla to the core. He was a huge man. Well, he's dead now. But I used to ask him about the war. And he told me that they had war names so that they would not be able to go after your family. They put you in a region that was not your rural area, so that if you had to do things to people that were not your relatives, you would not hesitate.
You know, before that, when I attended the black schools, I didn't feel the racism. I didn't feel the second-class citizenship, because you were always surrounded by blacks. You didn't even interact with the Europeans or the coloreds. In fact, the Europeans, coloreds, Asians, Africans, we all had separate education departments, separate curricula. Separate except for the fact that, of course, they were all Eurocentric. Can you believe I was an African, attending African institutions? I never learned any African history. They didn't teach us science and math either. The theory behind that, of course, was, well, you know, these Africans, they live in rural villages, in round huts, and therefore, the conceptualization of rectangles and angles would be so foreign to them that we cannot teach them science and math. The education from primary to secondary was simply so that blacks could serve white professionals as clerks. There were separate lines for the course cues, separate everything. I look back and I don't even understand how we shared the same bathrooms. But there were no more than maybe 20 Africans in the university at one time, but we had an African Students' Union, and we would stay up all night talking about Prime Minister Ian Smith's unilateral Declaration of Independence. It was during my days at the university that I realized that I'm black in Africa, and I'm losing out in my own country, for Christ's sake. And I remember this day. Ian Smith was at the front. He was capping the white graduates. Us Africans were in the back, but we started to sing, Ishe Komborera Africa. God bless Africa. That was the African national anthem at the time, and it was banned in the country. Ian Smith stopped the capping ceremony. He looks over to us and he says, Bobo Johnny! Baboon, climb the tree. He said, you are uncouth, uncivilized, leave. He knew he was unwanted there.
You mean the first time I realized I was going to Royal Cinema in town where Edgar's is now on First Street. I was going to watch him move. No, it was a musical called Woodstock. And I'm out there sitting, and there are these two white guys behind me, and they're putting their feet up on my shoulders, and one of them is stepping on me. And one of them had just finished smoking his cigarette, and he put it out on my neck. And you complain, and no one says anything. The manager also was white, so I did nothing. You realize that this is what we're living with, and you just put up with it. It's like being called a cafe or being paid different salaries. If the toilet was messy at work, they immediately thought it was you. You just put up with it. When you had visitors from the rural areas, you had to go to the police station and register. Your visitors, your relatives, they wanted to know how long the visitor was there, 5 days, 7 days, and then they would come and make sure the visitor was really there. But those guys, they would come in the middle of the night and shine torches in your eyes. They simply wanted to instill terror. You see, there were a lot of police informers, and there was a lot of harassment. It was like, Big Brother is watching. There was also a lot of infighting in Zimbabwe and ZANU. I remember the ZAPU youths were trying to harass the ZANU. And the fighting happened right there, on those streets. You would just run. They would take so many young boys and girls to these Matmiro meetings in the middle of the night. And many of those young girls, they would come back pregnant, so we hear. They would tell us, don't go to school, don't wear shoes, tirivana vevu. But the worst thing that happened was this guy. He rushed in here and they followed him. I remember mother was outside and he was bleeding and he rushed in here and they followed him. There were dishes in the sink and he was washing the blood off his face. And those guys, they came and they said, Mother, we don't care about you or your children. We just want this guy. Yeah, I think they killed that guy. It was right here in this house. I remember very well. Auntie Eunice had to clean it up. And then, I don't know what happened, but I think Smith declared a state of emergency and we woke up surrounded by barbed wire. It was like a concentration camp. They would arbitrarily arrest people. My father, he was marched to the police station so many times. And then by those flats over there, where we lived, there were soldiers right there. We used to go and play soccer with those guys. But then, this one time there was this boy walking by. They told him to stop and he didn't. So they shot him right there. And then this other time, this guy, this ex-combatant came to visit my mother in the middle of the night. The Rhodesian soldiers found out. They was shooting throughout the entire night until they killed him and his whole family. Pa, 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 pa. In the rural areas, they used to put people in keeps, like a doghouse. There was also a curfew from 6 to 6, and if you were late, Okoyo, you'd be shot on the spot. And then there were these mercenaries whom they hired. These guys used to ride around on horses. I remember my mother said, people in the rural areas are in for a hard time. I've never seen white people like that. They would go to sleep at 5 and lock up because of these headhunters who were looking for tails. That's why back then so many young black men ended up just fleeing into towns or crossing into Mozambique. It was bad, but then that was just my experience. There were also the roadblocks, the harassment, the searching of cars. Sometimes even without wanting, you would find whole schools marched to Mozambique for training. Can you imagine? Whole school gone.
You know, it was my first, I was in Form 1 at Goromonzi. I was in my cookery class with Miss Prosser, and she sent a few of us on an errand. You know, Goromonzi was the best, and it was the only high school for black children. Only a handful of us made it to high school then, but that was the law. Anyway, in cookery class, Miss Prosser sent a few of us to her flat. She told us, I want you to go to my flat and get me the newspapers from under the electric stove. But she stopped herself and looked tut-tutting as if to say, how could I be so forgetful? Dear me, you Africans have no idea what an electric stove is. You know, white people thought we only had wooden coal stoves. Anyway, I told her, Miss Prosser, my family has a 4-piece electric stove at home. She looked at me and she turned bright red. Her neck thickened as if she had mumps. She called me a liar and told me that I should tell the truth. When I insisted, I also told her that my father drove a car, and a car with a radio at that. She slapped me and said that I should tell the truth. I was sent to detention. These white women really had no idea how black people live.
was my 14th birthday in 1947. Thanks, Dad. It became quite the hobby. I would snap all around the location. People would ask me to take pictures of weddings, funerals, baptisms, or just everyday poses of lovers by the Musasa tree. I would charge a penny for a photo, and I had a small shop by Machipisa, and I had a darkroom in the back where I developed the photos. I was asleep late one night, and there was a knock at my door. Around the time, everyone at the location was wary about nighttime visitors because the war was really picking up. I lay still in my bed. The knock again in a soft voice. "We come in peace. We wish only to speak with you." I opened my door, and there were two gorillas standing on my stoop. I let them into my sitting room, and we spoke in complete darkness. At that time, there were many sellouts working undercover for the Rhodesians, and I could get caught if I switched on the lights. So under the cover of darkness, the boys told me what they wanted. They wanted me to supply them with cameras so they could go to training camps and take pictures of the conditions there, then bring the photos back to me to develop and mail overseas. It was an interesting demand. I was terrified, but